This is the video preceding the step glue up. What we're going to do today is we're going to take out our top and bottom steps. And what we're going to do is we're going to pre-finish both the top and bottom steps and all the other components today for our glue up. So let's get to it. So I took my steps out of the clamps and I have a little bit of glue staining right here I missed, as well as a little bit of a lip. All right, that's not too hard to address, so we'll clean that up using the sanders. Now on the back side, I noticed that I've actually chipped my edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to sand this side and have that face down and have this face up. All right. Now moving on to the other board, it had some other quirks to it. So right next to, hopefully I can show this. Yeah. I'll have to zoom in on that. So right here, some squeeze out touched the bar, the pipe clamp, and hardened. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to scrape this. Now the reason why it turns black is that because the glue is water-based and the pipe clamp is steel, when water and steel mix together they create an oxide, and that actually blackens the actual glue. Now I was lucky it didn't darken the wood itself, but in the future, I'm planning on either paste waxing my pipe clamps or putting packaging tape or saran wrap around them to protect my boards from getting oxide on them. So those are some tips you can use for glue up and stuff. So with that said, we're going to actually start cleaning these off. Now the big part is I'm just going to take a scraper to this and just knock that off. But the rest of the boards, we're going to sand them. Now, when you're sanding, and I'm going to be using an orbital sander today. So I got two orbital sanders with different grits on it. When I'm sanding today, to get this lip off, I'm actually going to break the rule that everyone knows, which is to sand with the grain. Right? Reason being is I want to get rid of the hump, so I'm going to have to go at a 45-degree angle across the board first with a heavier grit. Probably 60 or 80 grit, just to lower that level. All right. Once I've gotten that set, I'm going to change my angle, and then I'm going to sand with the grain going back and forth. Now, when you're sanding, a lot of you have a tendency to go real quick, back and forth, back and forth. It's not a good idea. You want to go 1 inch of travel for 1 second, or 1 Mississippi. So if this is a 13-inch board, it should take me 13 Mississippis to go back and forth. The reason why this is good for intro students, or some people who are just getting into woodworking, is by practicing light pressure. So I'm not forcing this down onto the board. So after I knocked the glue off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sand both my steps. Now I have a lip here, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to break the rule of sanding, which is to sand with the grain. All right? To get rid of this hump here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sand at a 45-degree angle against the grain with a heavier grit or a rougher sandpaper like 60 or 80 grit. All right? And as I go across, all right, I'm leveling off that surface, as opposed to if I were to sand like this, I'd have a little dome in the middle, and I don't want that. So I'll sand at 45, get the hump off, and then change my grits up to maybe 80, 100, or 120, and then just start slowly going across. Now, when I'm holding a sander, I don't want to be forcing it down into the workpiece. That's how you get those scratches or those swirls, and you also burn your pads off of your sanders, and that's not a good thing. So you want to go with enough pressure where you can control the travel of the sander, but not force it down onto the workpiece. So it's a mix of finesse and control. Also, how fast you should be traveling, I've seen multiple different answers. The one that's worked for me for beginners and other woodworkers is, if this is a 13-inch board, it should be 1 inch per 1 second. All right, so if this is 13 inches, 13 seconds is how long this sander should travel across. And again, when I'm sanding, I want to overlap my path. So I'm going to go here and then back. Forward, then back. It's like cutting a lawn. You want to overlap each cut as you're going so you get a nice consistent finish across the board itself. Now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be pre-finishing all of our parts as well. So I'll cut in some clips of us sanding all these boards. But again, I'm prepping everything for the glue up for our step stool. So with that said, I'm going to actually hook this up to suction so I can pull the dust off the board. Now, I wanted to say that real quick, is hooking up a vacuum to your sander really brings down the dust in the space. And what's nice is it keeps the sanding disc nice and clean, right? The cleaner you can keep this, the longer you can sand for and not have to worry about wearing this out. Also, you won't be grinding sawdust into your workpiece, which is a good thing. Last tip. If you want good sanding, spend the money on the good sanding discs. I know they're expensive, you know, like Diablo, Norton, and there are a couple other American companies out there. But if you spend the money for the good discs, you will actually increase the efficiency of your sanding. Because again, these will remove material quicker or more efficiently than if you were to go out and buy the cheap discs on Amazon. Now, there are 2 types of orbital discs I'm actually going to probably use today. So I'm going to use the standard red Diablo discs. I also have these screen discs, and what's nice about these are they're washable, so I can, if they ever get gummed up with grit, I can wash them out, let them dry, and I can stick them back on and I can get more use out of them. Personally, I like these netted discs because again, it's just way easier to clean up as I'm sanding. With that said, let's get to work. A few more tips for when you're sanding a lot of work is I'm using this drawer grip material, and what's nice, it'll help me hold my material nice and steady as I'm sanding, and I won't have to worry about it sliding around. The other thing too is you might notice I'm wearing gloves. This just helps because I'm doing a lot of sanding, and if you don't wear gloves, it dampens. If you do wear gloves, it dampens the vibrations in the sanders, and it just protects your hands. All right, and then lastly, even though I have the doors open and the spaces are, you know, even though I have the doors open, still should be wearing ear protection because I'm doing a lot of sanding and I'm in close proximity with the sander. So with that said, let's get to work. So some of you might be wondering why where did the 45-degree rule come from for sanding lips? Well, back in the day, before sanders, they used to take a planer or a jack plane like this, or what they would call a scrub plane, and they would scrub the board across it at a 45-degree angle. And what that would ensure is that both boards would be in perfect flatness to each other. All right. Nowadays, we could just use a sander, an orbital sander, or a belt sander to level it off. The reason why I'm doing this is this board now is too big for my planer. Normally, what we would do at the Ward Wood Shop is that if we did have a lip, we would just gently run it through on the planer just to flatten those two boards. But make sure, though, we need to make sure every drop of glue is gone. Another tip I wanted to mention is with an orbital sander, you can grab it, slow it down, so you don't have to worry about it running off on you after you're sanding. Now that I've gotten both boards flat, I'm going to start working on getting any of the glue stains or pencil marks out with this sander with a 120 grit disc, and then I'm going to slowly work up to 220, which is the final grit we're going to use to sand this down. So with that said, let's get pre-finishing. And what I'm doing right now is I'm just hand sanding with a block sander. And I'm just taking all the planer marks off the edge here. Now, again, when you're hand sanding, you can go as fast as you want, because again, you are the one doing the sanding. If I was sanding with a power sander, I don't want to outpace the machine itself. So again, since it's just a sanding block, I can go as fast as I need to clean up my piece. And I'm just looking to get rid of the jointer marks on the edge here, just to make it nice and clean. There we go. So the process is pretty much the same for your side pieces and your rear supports when you're sanding them. Again, if there is a lip, you want to go at 45 to flatten it down. But for the most part, these have been sanded down with 80, 120 grit, and I'm just going to go gently at 220 and clean up. There are some dents and nicks that are too deep for me to fix with sanding, so I'm just going to leave them just for aesthetics. But we can, if there are some dents that are small, we can either sand them out, or we could take a wet rag and a household iron, and we could iron out those dents. And what that does is, because wood is cellular, all right, what we could do is we could take the water And then we take a heat source, which an iron is, and we force that water into those cells. And what happens to the cell walls is they expand. And we call that grain raising. And it'll raise the grain up. So if we do have small dents, we can fix them using that method. The other thing too is sanding radiuses. I don't normally take a power sander to do that. I use a spindle sander like the one on my drill press to do that. Or just go in there with a hand and just sand it down. All right, just be careful you don't round it over too much, but just enough that it's nice and clean. All right, so let's sand this one here. So again, as opposed to the top step, the grain's going this direction. All right, so we're not going this way, we're going this way. So since it's 9 inches, it's going to be 9 Mississippi. So the last step we're going to do, right before we put all this together, is I'm going to router the edges and the end grain of my top step just to soften the edges, both for aesthetics and safety. So let's get to it. So we're here at the router table, and what we're going to do is we're going to put a chamfer or a angled cut around the perimeter of my workpiece here. Alright, so I'm going to put my good face, so the good face of the board facing down as I route. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dry run it real quick, showing what's going to go happen. Is I'm going to bring it on my fence, go through the cut, rotate counterclockwise. The reason why we don't go the other way is we don't want it to chip out. Alright, then I'm going to go across the end grain, and I'm going to use a scrap piece to protect the edge grain from chipping. And I'm going to do that all the way around the edge. So, let's do it. There we go, we got our nice chamfered edge. And there we go, we got our nice chamfered edge, and the top is done.
Can you show me how you do your obstacle course again? Alright, ready? On your mark, get set.
So I did make a mistake. I've actually put the bottom facing up, so my bad. So instead what I did was I did a soft taper on the top and a large taper on the bottom just to create this cool shape. And then that's the top. So we're all done. So all my parts have been pre-finished. We routed the top. Now, just a side note again, I did make a mistake. I did put the bottom facing the wrong way. So the bottom was facing down. I accidentally cut a taper there. So to fix my mistake, I put a gentle taper on the correct side to create this cool little pattern. So the top is done, the sides, the rear support, and the step. So next time what's going to happen is we're going to actually glue all these parts together to make our step stool actually a step stool. So with that said, have a great day, and I'll see you at the next video.